Hey guys, and welcome to the video where we talk about mind-brain reduction. Now, as you know, Nagel has a bit of an issue with claims that we can fully account for what consciousness is and what experience is using some kind of materialist reduction or a framework that seeks to explain mental states using objective reference points, okay, because consciousness has a particular point of view, a unique quality that's ascribed to that point of view, okay? So what are we going to do today? Well, we will explore how Nagel doesn't reject objective accounts. He thinks some phenomena are better off described in an objective way, which we would have seen when we referred to the example of the lightning or the rainbow in the previous video. But he says that objective accounts are inadequate for generating useful conclusions about mental states because they just can't they can't explain the full reality, or they can't account for the full reality of consciousness and what it is, right? So we're going to explore how Nagel doesn't reject objective accounts, but argues that they, not it, they are inadequate for generating useful conclusions about mental states. That's what we're doing today. So we're going to refer to our prior knowledge when we were looking at the mind-body problem, and then we're going to explore how materialist or subjective reductionist accounts of the mind are inadequate. They might provide a little bit of explanatory power, but they're not able to fully account for the nature of the subjective experience. So can you write these down, please, and then can you score yourself? And you need to understand that this is mainly about what we call mind-brain reduction. So when we're looking at SMART and he says mental states equals brain states, that's what he's really referring to in this section here, okay? So it's not just rejecting materialism as a way of fully accounting for consciousness, it's basically equating. It's when we equate the mind state with the brain state. That's what we're looking at. We're getting a bit more specific this time, okay? So can you draw me a picture of some neurons? Because obviously that'll get you to think about what Smart said about identity theory and brain states equaling mind states or mental states. Okay, so as we have seen previously, Nagel doesn't really bring into question the precise nature or the accuracy of objective or scientific accounts for things that are like lightning, okay? We can describe lightning as an electrical discharge, and even the blind alien who has some understanding of the objective framework of what lightning is from that point of view can understand it. We get that. So take a note. He doesn't reject objective accounts of certain phenomena like lightning, okay? Take a note. And again, this brings us back to the poll we had where we look at many different phenomena can be understood from the framework of objectivity. And the good thing is that, like I said in the previous video, that means that many different people from many different individual points of views are able to refer to the objective framework and understand it and share something in common, right? So for example, it's easy to say that water is like, or is, H2O. It's really easy to say that because it's a phenomenon that can be understood objectively, okay? And it's really easy to say that lightning is basically the flow of electrons, easy to understand, or electrical discharge. And if we actually had many different intelligent species, right, kind of thinking about those phenomena, yeah, you know what, they could easily understand it. They could really kind of grasp it. So if you had the intelligent human, the intelligent bat, and the intelligent alien, they could easily understand lightning and water the way that we do because we've got that objective framework to do so. But when we use this kind of scientific reductionism or objective reductionism, we have to leave behind our understanding of what it's like to have a particular point of view. So he's basically saying that if I was to use scientific objective language to study the phenomena of consciousness, then I would have to totally reject the singular point of view, because that can't be accounted for with that language. Take a note. And then we would have to move towards an understanding using an objective framework, okay, which tries to kind of explain the mind from a perspective that everybody has access to, okay? So the problem is that this isn't really compatible with subjectivity, right? And if we follow this framework, we get it, we leave behind, we completely desert the point of view, the subjective point of view that we all have, the phenomenal experience that we all have, the phenomenal consciousness that we all have. And the problem with that is we've pretty much identified that that is a part of consciousness. So you're completely rejecting and not actually explaining what is an integral part of consciousness if you try to understand it from an objective point of view. And that's what happens when you try and argue that mental states equal brain states. By studying the brain state, you can't really ever account for what it is like to be consciousness, or what it is like to be conscious, or what it is like for a bat to be a bat. You get what I mean? Take a note. So, again, what we can conclude is that there is no... Sorry guys, well-meaning interruption, but that's just going to happen when you're doing this stuff in an office. So basically what we can conclude is that there is no framework, an objective framework, for understanding the first-person quality of experience that can be understood by the alien intelligent bat, intelligent mouse, or the intelligent person. And when we do try and come up with a framework that is objective, has the nature of science, and can be easily understood, you know, the middle point here, the section that we have in common that everybody can access, we move further and further away from an account of experience or subjectivity, because, let's face it, such a framework will completely exclude a single person point of view, okay? Take a note. So we move further and further away. And Nagel says, look, okay, any theory that tries to substitute an objective framework, or like a behavioralist framework, for a complete explanation of how the real aspect of consciousness and experience work, is just inadequate. Like, it tries to explain away consciousness and experience as if there's nothing else to be reduced, when of course there is. That is the first person singular point of view, the phenomenology of what it is to be that particular being, or that particular species, right? So, if it's physical, it's supposed to be an account that is completely full and explains the nature of consciousness. So, if a physical account of consciousness that completely explains consciousness and subjective experience exists, well, it needs to be able to explain the singular point of view, yet we just can't find it. We can't find it at all. So take a note. Okay, so to recap, the very nature of an objective scientific framework for explaining consciousness, you know, some kind of point of view of behaviorism or other scientific points of view, you know, can't explain the full reality, because it seems to argue or argue that what consciousness is in a way that says, I've basically reduced everything and there is nothing left over. There are no leftovers to be reduced. But we know that's not the case. The leftover, when we use this framework, will always be the phenomenology or the phenomenological experience of the being itself, okay? So if we use physical theory to account for a complete definition of consciousness, well, that's going to be problematic, because right now we can't find it, alright? So even if identity theory is plausible, even if it's highly probable, there's always still going to be the experience of what it's like to undergo the brain processes. So if you're saying brain processes equal mental states, you know, sure, mental states might emerge out of the brain process. They might be a result of it. but there still is a feeling of what it is like to undergo the brain state, okay? And that's really important, because there's always what it is like to be that particular person. And if we've seen Get Out, you know, thinking about the movie Get Out before, we could do a great analysis using Nagel's framework, because really it was about what it is like for a white person to be black, not really what it is about for a black person to be black. Do you get what I mean? So again, you know, how do we do it? So we're still looking for that explanation. We really are. Okay? And Nagel does not think that we have an explanation that physically can account for consciousness. We just can't do it. Because rather, physical hypotheses start with dodgy and incomplete assumptions about what consciousness is. Take a note. And because they start with that, they're going to yield conclusions that are dodgy. They're going to yield conclusions that are incomplete. And we're just not going to be able to say anything confidently about what it is to be conscious, because our hypothesis never really factored in a full account of what it is to be conscious. So take a note. Alright, so we do not know how materialist accounts might be true, because we do not know how materialist accounts can fully account for consciousness, because we do not fully understand what consciousness is from an objective framework. So how can any materialist accounts later on, or conclusions from the point of view of materialist reductionism, actually be true? Well, how can we know that they're true with confidence if we don't fully understand how consciousness works from a materialist point of view? And it looks like, from our point of view now, that an objective materialist point of view can't account for the subjective quality of experience. So take some notes. So let's do the reading, and remember, we always get a much more sophisticated understanding of what he says when we read. Let's go. We appear to be faced with a general difficulty about psychophysical reduction, i.e. mind and being reduced to physical phenomena, okay? In other areas, the process of reduction is a move in the direction of greater objectivity towards a more accurate view of the real nature of things, like lightning, like water. Let's keep reading. This is accomplished by reducing our dependence on individual or species-specific points of view towards the objective, towards the object of investigation. And this is something we didn't raise in the summary. He's literally claiming that when we use objective language, we're moving towards the object of investigation, and we're moving away from our species-specific point of view. You might want to take a note. We describe it not in terms of the impressions it makes on our senses, but in terms of its more general effects and properties, detectable by means other than the human senses. So basically it's detectable by things that, could be detected by many other senses, even senses we don't have. The less it depends on a specifically human viewpoint, the more objective is our description. That's awesome. Write that down. It's a great quote. It is possible to follow this path because, although the concept and ideas we employ in thinking about the external world are initially applied from a point of view that involves a perceptual apparatus, they are used by us to refer to things beyond themselves, towards which we have the phenomenal point of view. Therefore, we can abandon it in favour of another and still be thinking about the same things. Let's go over that a bit and I'll reread that, okay? It is possible for this path because, although the concepts and ideas we employ in thinking about the external world are initially applied from our point of view, so we initially start from our point of view that involves our perceptual apparatus, they are used by us to refer to things beyond themselves. So we're looking at referring to things beyond our perceptual apparatuses, okay? Towards which we have the phenomenal point of view. So in other words, he's really talking about Kantian phenomenal point of view here. He's not saying nominal, but we're looking at things from our phenomenological perspective and trying to understand the phenomena. And therefore we can abandon the phenomenal point of view in favour for an objective framework where we can think about other things, okay? Or the same things. So because the object is beyond our sense apparatus, we are able to, at some level, create an understanding of it, even though it's a phenomenological understanding of it, that refers to the thing that is beyond our senses. In turn, the same thing can happen for an alien using different senses or different phenomenology, and we can therefore share something in common. That's basically what he's saying. Take a note. Experience itself, however, does not seem to fit the pattern. The idea of moving from appearance to reality, which is what we do beforehand, that's really what he's saying up here, right? From appearance to reality seems to make no sense here. What is the analogue in this case to pursuing a more objective understanding of the same phenomena by abandoning the initial subjective viewpoint toward them in favour of another that is more objective but concerns the same thing? If you're a bit confused here, what he's basically saying is if I see a candle, obviously I create a phenomenal representation of it, right? And I understand the phenomenological representation, but because part of that candle is triggering off my phenomenological representation of the candle, it still references something external, which then can be referred to by the alien or the bat using different senses, all right? And we can somehow find an area or an objective framework to move towards once we reflect on our phenomenological understanding. What we're saying is with consciousness, you just can't do that, okay? You can't move from the subjective viewpoint to the objective viewpoint by referring to what you've phenomenologically constructed. Certainly it appears unlikely that we'll ever get closer to the real nature of human experience by leaving behind the particularity, which means individual circumstances of our human point of view, and striving towards a description in terms accessible to beings that could not imagine what it's like to be us. So what he's saying is, if we try and explain to people what our consciousness is by referring to it almost like it is the object of the candle, we'll in turn alienate ourselves completely from an understanding of what it is for that subjective point of view to be there, okay? Take a note. If the subjective character of experience is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, then any shift to greater objectivity, i.e. moving away from our phenomenological understanding of something to the objective reality of the candle, and in trying to do that, in this case with consciousness, all right, that is an attempt to a specific viewpoint, does not take us nearer to the real nature of the phenomenon, it takes us further away. So if I try and understand consciousness like I understand the candle, bang, I'm just going to completely leave out the subjective phenomenological experience of it, okay? In a sense, the seeds of this objection to the reducibility of experience are already detectable in the successful case of reduction, for in discovering sound to be, in reality, a wave phenomenon in air or other media, we leave behind one viewpoint to take up another. So we're moving from our subjective viewpoint to understand the objective viewpoint. And the auditory, human or animal viewpoint that we leave behind remains unreduced. So we still have that phenomenological experience of it, but we still therefore have the objective account of it that we can gain by reflecting on our phenomenological experience, and that objective account can be understood using other sensory apparatus or other ways of knowing that different species or different minds can have, okay? Members of radically different species may both be able to understand the same physical events in objective terms, and this does not require that they understand the phenomenal forms in which those events appear to the senses of members of other species. Exactly what I said. We have a phenomenal construction of the candle. We see the candle. We reflect on what we see. We therefore detect the objective element within the candle that can be understood by something else. But the alien can never really understand our phenomenological experience of the candle. But they can detect the objective nature of the candle that we get from reflecting on our phenomenological experience, okay? Thus, it is a condition of their referring to a common reality that their more particular viewpoints are not part of the common reality that they both apprehend. That's what I'm saying. The reflection on the specific phenomenological experience of the candle allows us to refer to the common reality that we can all detect through different senses. That's the objective framework. Objective framework equals common reality. The reduction can succeed only if the species-specific viewpoint is omitted, so we get rid of the specific species viewpoint from what has to be reduced. Okay, so objective frameworks completely omit the subjective account of our phenomenological experience, and that's how we come up with the common understanding. The reduction can succeed only if the species-specific viewpoint is omitted from what is to be reduced. But while we are right to leave this viewpoint aside in seeking a fuller understanding of the external world, so really is basically saying everything we have access to and share in common with other creatures would be external. Therefore, the reflection in our phenomenological experience allows us to gain an understanding of the external objective thing that's triggering it. And we can use objective common language or common frameworks to do that. Right? We probably can't do that with the internal, can we? Alright. But while we are right to leave this point of view aside in seeking fuller understanding of the external world, we cannot ignore it permanently, since it is the essence of the internal or private world, alright? And not merely a point of view. Alright, most of the neo-behaviorism, so remember Skinner's theory of black box? Well, new theories based on Skinner's kind of black box of behaviorism, right? He's saying most of the neo-behaviorism of the recent philosophical psychology results from an effort to substitute an objective concept of mind for the real thing. In other words, he's saying if we try and use this objective common framework to describe how the mind works, we're going to completely ignore the subjective quality and experience of the mind, okay? Most of it does it, in order to have nothing left over which cannot be reduced. So it pretends that we've basically reduced everything using an objective framework to the way behaviorism understands the way the mind works, right? Problem with that being is we still know that there is going to be something that it can be reduced to. There still is something that needs to be reduced, but can't be reduced using that framework. If we acknowledge that a physical theory of mind must account for the subjective character of experience, we must admit that no presently available conception gives us a clue to how this could be done. The problem is unique. If mental processes are indeed physical processes, then there is something that it is like intrinsically, i.e. from our own internal point of view, to undergo certain physical processes. Like I said before, even if brain processes trigger off the mental event and the mental experience of consciousness, there still is a qualia or an internal feeling of what it is like to undergo that brain process. What it is for such a thing to be in the case remains still a mystery. Alright, so hopefully that's really helped. Let's look at our goals and success criteria again. Yes, we did look at our prior knowledge. Could not have understood this if you hadn't read the rest of the text. We know that he's fine for objective reductionist frameworks to be used to study external phenomena. We are phenomenological beings. We can't know the nominal world from a Kantian point of view. But we can have an inkling about what the nominal world is, a itty bitty bit of it. Or more importantly, we can have a common understanding, maybe not a nominal understanding, but a common understanding of what the object is. Because we reflect on our phenomena and we can therefore have access a little bit to the objective framework, okay? And by having access a little bit to the objective framework, we can have access to what other species could understand when they reflect on their own phenomenological experience to gain access to the objective framework. And the objective framework becomes the point of view that we all have in common, all right? But this can't be done with internal points of view which no one else has access to but yourself. It can't be done because no one else can externally reflect on that. It's only something that's unique and private to you, all right? Neurons, well, you know why we drew neurons. It's that old identity theory brought up by Smart. It's like, can we reduce brain activity? Can we reduce mental states like consciousness to brain activity? Well, it looks like still Nagel is saying no, because at the moment the language and the way that we understand brain activity to work has to completely omit the subjective first-person phenomenological point of view of a conscious creature, okay? Hopefully this has made sense. Move on to the exam-like question. I hope you have a good go at it, and start watching the next video as soon as you can. Cheers.